Togolese President Faure Gnassingbé has been picked to lead a new African Union-backed mediation effort to revive the stalled Eastern DRC peace process. The AU and international leaders met in Lomé and adopted a unified mediation framework document and a plan to guide coordinated action. In the past few decades, there have been a number of unsuccessful attempts to mediate the DRC conflict as well as other African crises. This week on the program, we ask, how can the continent ensure that African-led mediation efforts are effective in ending conflicts? I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. Joining me now to unpack the latest DRC peace effort and other mediation attempts are from Dakar, Dr. Oluwale Ojewale, Regional Coordinator for Central Africa region at the Institute for Security Studies. And with me here in studio is Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali. He is the founder and chairman of the Horn Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program. Dr. Ali, let's begin with you. We know Togo was recently picked to lead a new AU-backed unified mediation to revive the stalled DRC peace process. Why Togo?
Yeah, thank you. Togo, because Togo has a very successful and good track record for successful mediation processes. If you recall, it was in Togo with the Lomé Accords that ended a protracted conflict, bloody, violent conflict in Sierra Leone way back. The second characteristic here is that Togo is actually removed from DR Congo geographically. We've seen that many countries in the region have tried, and because of perceived or real vested interests by regional countries that are in the East African region, in Central African region, have actually failed, and Togo is removed geographically. The third element here is the question of trust. There appears to be trust on Togo as a country, and also Gnassingbé as a person to lead this process.
Okay. All right. So, Dr. Ojewale, Togo is geographically, as Dr. Ali said, distant from the Great Lakes. So, in your opinion, to what extent does this outsider status make President Faure Gnassingbé a more credible mediator compared to immediate neighbors who, as Dr. Ali has mentioned, may have a better understanding of the causes and the actors?
I think, yes, it's encouraging that for the first time we are seeing the African Union making concerted efforts to take responsibility for the crisis in Congo. And I do hope we will see that extended to other conflict theater like Sudan. But yes, it's very good that at least compared to what we have seen about the previous processes from Nairobi to Luanda and then Qatar and even the US intervention, at least now we have an African country taking ownership and providing leadership on that trajectory. But as much as I appreciate the fact that people are dying and there's a need for a timely intervention to halt these senseless killings that have been going on, I also have a bit of a reservation for the person that is midwifing this process, because you know, people are going to trust the process and they are going to look at the profile of the person that is involved. So I think there's a question mark on the credentials of Gnassingbé in my midwife in this process, looking at what is happening at the domestic front. But we're at a time that it's almost about putting everything in the basket, whatever can bring about peace. So I can only wish them the best.
Well, what specific diplomatic currency does Togo bring to the table? I mean, is it their historical record when it comes to mediation efforts? You talked to us about the Sierra Leone crisis, for example, or is there a specific mandate from the AU that gives them the teeth?
Yeah, I think it's really about the historical track record here that Togo does have as a nation state, as a country, in successfully mediating previous conflicts. And that is really where the African Union is banking on Togo. And I agree with my colleague, Dr. Ojewale, that the democratic credentials that Gnassingbé as a person commands has been tainted because of what happened in Togo. And therefore, AU, in my view, is really banking on Togo is a country that is removed geographically from the region, and the fact that the process is now being Africanized. You know, AU is moving to owning this particular problem. I think Dr. Ojola said rightly so that we've seen the Doha process, the Washington process, this mediation or attempts to resolve conflict in the DRC is being owned by other countries and individuals, personalities from outside Africa. Now is the time for the African Union to bring this conflict resolution home and deal with it.
Let me pick on something that the two of you have brought up, and that is the person of Gnassingbé, him as a person and his track record. And given that he was appointed as the chief mediator for this peace process, the question is, what makes a good mediator?
A good mediator is a person that, you know, have the gravitas and the personality that is easily trusted, has some kind of emotional intelligence, is able to listen, is a very active listener. A good mediator also is one that is experienced, wise, is able to know and anticipate when to call groups together, when to break them apart and put them in different rooms, in caucuses, when to call on others that are not in the room or not in the process to come and make the process move forward, or unknot certain knots that challenge the mediation process. So wisdom is key here.
Dr. Jawale, what are your thoughts on what makes a good mediator?
For me, I think the starting point is the credential of the person that is coming to serve in that mediating role. And because you must have something to tout. And if those things are not really there, then the discrediting begins right from the word go. So the mediator must be one, you know, even if it is at the domestic level, you can't be a party or you have also committed similar infractions somewhere and stand to play that role effectively. Because there's a bias, there is a cognitive dissonance that people can see. They can't really reconcile where you're coming from and what you want to put on the table in terms of negotiating for peace. I mean, that is the number one thing. But if we look at it broadly, I think we also have mediators who can wield the stick and the carrot. And that is where you have the big powers. So if we look outside the continent, in terms of countries that have the might, then the mediator can be anybody, including anybody that you can look broadly when you look at the global state of things now. It can even be land grabber. So in that sense, because the person probably has the big power, the military power to be able to establish deterrence. So it's a mixed bag, you know, and when people are desperate for peace, it's not really so much about the theory that we advance. It is about who can bring the peace. And when you look inward on the African continent, we seem to be missing on these two critical factors that I raised now, in terms of those who have the resources to put the necessary tools on the ground that is going to foster deterrence. And then the second one, which is very, very important, particularly in our home context, when you look at the African conflict resolution mechanism that we have seen traditionally, once you don't have others who have the moral courage to be able to step into that water, the rest is going to be reduced to probably textbook theories.
We've talked about the various initiatives that have been there in regards to peace efforts in DRC. So let's talk about harmonizing a fragmented approach that has produced many peace deals. It is one of the major decisions made in Lomé, or one of the major decisions, yeah, of course, made in Lomé. But what approach does the Gnassingbé team suggest in taking? Because we've seen so many other initiatives. So what makes this one different from all the others we've had before?
Yeah, you can actually see that the Togo process is now moving forward and is bringing all the 8 protocols that are there in the Declaration of Principles and frameworks that are actually in both Doha and the Washington processes. What the Doha-Washington processes have done is actually to only address only 2 of those protocols. One is the ceasefire and how to monitor that ceasefire, and then exchange of prisoners. But the other 6 have not taken off at all. Now, Gnassingbé and Togo-led process is actually unlocking this, and based on the recent, in fact, on the communique itself, the 6 pillars or protocols are actually now being discussed very actively, and feelers are being sent to both DRC, Rwanda, and the M23 to now start moving in the direction of addressing the other 6 protocols.
Okay. Dr. Ojuwale, the Togo meeting focused more on implementation rather than just declarations. How can a mediator ensure that a signed peace treaty actually translates to a ceasefire in North Kivu?
Thank you so much. It's a mixture of so many things. And one of the key factors which I think has been largely missing, and which I thought America was going to bring to bear, particularly with their interest in strategic minerals in DRC, was deterrence. And deterrence comes in different dimensions. You can use soft tools like sanctions in case anybody violates the content of the agreement. And there's a traditional military approach in which you just mobilize men on the ground with boots and the necessary artillery to serve the purpose of deterrence. That has been largely missing in all the conversation and the processes that we have seen so far. Now, coming to Togo, apart from the factors that Dr. Ali has raised in the studio, I don't know how much of gravitas that Togo can bring in terms of establishing that deterrence, because what we are seeing is that the AU is also not looking in that direction. You know, you can separate 2 people from fighting, but you know, when the police shows up on the scene, is a different ballgame. You might not even have to maybe separate them. Mere appearance alone, everybody will take dressing. So I think that is also needed now, and I don't know how much of resources in that regard that AU want to put at the behest of Gnassingbé to be able to navigate this crisis. I'm very sure you know, and you're probably aware that both parties are not relenting, and I have a bit of cautionary optimism that the crisis that the big and middle powers like the US and Qatar, emerging countries like Qatar with their resources and everything, have not been able to put out. I think if Gnassingbé is able to move the needle, it should be awarded the Peace Prize maybe next year.
Let's talk about African mediation efforts, Dr. Ali. We've seen external players coming in. We've mentioned the Qatar peace process, the Washington-led peace process. For Sudan, we've seen the Jeddah peace process. But there's also a desire to have African-led mediation efforts. What do you think makes African mediators strong and unique?
You know, first of all, the reason why we are having so many processes driven from outside Africa to address African conflicts is because of the weaknesses that the Africa Union, the regional blocs, and the distrust that are there amongst African leaders are bringing onto the conflicts themselves. And that's why it's very important to caution even this process that AU has reignited again. I think Dr. Ojuwale said very clearly that you know, we need to be very cautious. It is possible to actually address the conflict in Congo if African leaders are going to own this conflict and resolve this conflict rather than leaving this conflict to others outside of Africa. But that will also take quite some substantial mobilization of resources and also credible threat to punish those that will go against any agreement that is going to be there. This is what the Africa Union lacks and the African countries lack a lot in mediation processes that leads to peace agreements. Yes.
Dr. Ojuwale, we champion African solutions for African problems, yet many peace processes still rely on Western funding or UN logistics. Can African-led mediation truly be independent if the checkbook is elsewhere?
It cannot, and the answer is quite obvious. And that is the reason why it appears like African Union has not been able to move the needle. Sometimes you even reflect about the state of conflict on the continent, and you ask some very morbid question like, is AU doing anything about these things? Or you say, what are the things that AU is actually doing about this crisis? And it goes to shows the state of things. If you rely on external donors to even fund your basic program activities as a regional political and economic organization or regional political organization like KU, then it means that it is what EU pays the pipers that dictate the tunes. And it's a situation in which we do a lot of talk, but the resources is not really there. I believe the AU has come of age after 60 years to be able to address some of these lingering crises if the African leaders are actually up and doing in terms of their obligations to the African Union. Otherwise, you have a secretariat that is functioning, but is hugely unable to deliver on its core mandate because those resources are there. For instance, you look, if possibly there is a strong standby force that can establish deterrence in all those places, maybe we will not be talking about what we're talking about now. And the big issue really, which is a thing of concern for me as an African, is that I think we are moving into the era in which we are losing those who have those moral courage and standing to be able to step into this crisis. Any time I reflect on the state of Sudan and Congo, my mind scans through the continent and I can't see the Desmond Tutu, the Nelson Mandela. It appears everyone is just to himself. Nobody can really call the leaders to orders. Nobody can talk to them. And my first reflection, realizing that we're going to have this topic, is I felt like, why Gnassingbé? Why not Thabo Mbeki? These are some of, because when you have people who have such democratic credentials, who step aside perhaps when their tenure ended, or there is not really so much of scandal subverting the constitutional process. But unfortunately, we are losing those critical voices in Africa. And it appears that is the reason why nobody can really talk to Kagame and Tshisekedi, and we are in this quagmire now.
All right. Well, let's go to a short break now. But when we come back, we will continue our discussion on African mediation efforts. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me are Dr. Oluwale Ojewale and Dr. Mustafa Ali. Let's continue our discussion on Africa's efforts to mediate its conflicts. And Dr. Ali, if we look at cases like the AU mediation, the AU-led mediation in the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia, or past successes in Sierra Leone, like you mentioned, those actually did work. Question is, what were the factors that made those successful while others like the DRC and Sudan have failed?
It all boils down to the model of mediation that is being deployed, is being used in these conflicts. If you looked at the Sierra Leonean model that was used, it was more of root cause a driven model. It was more of a structural model to mediation, and in this it was very transformative. It involved and got you know the people from Sierra Leone, from all sectors, the civil society, the government, the rebels, the women were also involved. In fact, they played a big role in actually the pre-mediation aspects of the mediation that led to the Lome Peace Accords. If you compare that with the DR Congo model, which is pretty much elitist top-down model, a lot of discussions held between talking heads, rebel heads, and it doesn't really percolate to the grassroots, to the community. It's not organic. And you can actually see its inorganic nature in the way, you know, things are happening in Doha, things are happening in Washington, D.C., that the people on the ground feel very much excluded. And if people on the ground feel excluded, then the likelihood or chances of success in conflict resolution is you can't really succeed. It's very difficult.
Right. Dr. Jawale, often mediators are current heads of states. You know, he mentioned men in suits. Does this create a club of presidents dynamic where mediators are hesitant to hold their peers accountable for human rights abuses or proxy wars?
Yes, I think they take too far the principle of non-interference in the internal political dynamics of each country. And that has probably limited efforts to be able to find a lasting solution to some of these crises. And if you look at the trajectory of countries in the past 3 to 2 years in Africa, even in places where you have expected hope to spring, we have seen despondency. And we can go on and on to mention names of countries. Is it Tanzania? Look at the recent democratic development. Is it Kenya? Is it Nigeria? Some of the big boys on the continent are also battling some concerns about internal legitimacy. Then that erodes the possibility of probably standing tall to be able to talk to some of these leaders. I believe it is not so much a failure of governance as, multilateralism as we have seen it. I think the crisis in Africa, the crisis of mediation in Africa now is that you can sample across African leaders, and it will be very hard to be able to pick 2 or 3 who stand above board, because it's basically about finding leaders who can actually confront this. But if you have leaders who are subverting the constitutional process, who are serving since 1986 in government, and they are very close neighbor to those conflicts, like Dr. Ali mentioned, you need a broad base of acceptance for peace mediation, for the mediation effort to work. It depends on who you are sending, the democratic credentials, what the individuals stand for in moments like this. But when those are not there across east, west, and southern part of the continent, it becomes very, very difficult to really confront the issues in the room.
Dr. Ali, coming to you, why is the African peace architecture so often reactive after blood has been shed rather than proactive?
Actually, the African peace and security architecture is designed to be proactive, to actually prevent conflict. You have designed into the Africa peace and security architecture the early warning systems at the regional level. For example, within IGA, there's the conflict early warning system, C1, which is supposed to ensure that policymakers, decision takers are informed ahead of time that this conflict is brewing and is going to affect your countries or your communities in ways that you might not be able to douse it if the fires were lit, and therefore prevent it before it's out violent. If you look, the problem here is,
yes, because I was going to ask, why do we not see that then?
The people who are responsible for ensuring that the architecture works. I'm not sure they really understand these issues, and that some of them are just put there for political expediency. They are not going to deal with these issues. You know, look at Somaliland, with Israel recognizing Somaliland, and then Africa Union now rushing, many countries in the region rushing and saying, no, we can't allow this to happen. Well, they knew that Somalia has been a failed state for a very long time, and people have just been jumping all over the map on Somalia issue, and then now we're having another crisis in Somalia in our hands. And so it's not really the Africa peace and security architecture that is bad. It is actually very proactive. It's those people that are supposed to be responsible and ensuring that conflicts are prevented before they actually become violent, or when they're still structural in nature.
That is heartbreaking. So, Dr. Jawale, should we then move away from high-level presidential mediation towards a permanent, professionalized body of African mediators who aren't tied to active political offices?
The nature of the crisis implies that there is a need for a lot of state involvement. The mobilization can only take place at the state level, at the multilateral level, because anybody that has not really attained such, that doesn't command such widespread respect on the continent, it's very difficult for such individuals to really step into the water. What we probably need is to see the emergence of new voices. And if we broaden this, like you are thinking, I think we might get to the point that we might also begin to also look in the direction of the private sector, maybe looking at the billionaires of the continent, across Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Kenya. If they have commitment to such social issues, it might not be out of place, because maybe we can begin to look in that direction. And we're at the critical point that we have to probably try what we have never tried before. Look at like maybe people like Mo Ibrahim. Those people probably also need to step into the arena now, because it appears that we have tried political solution and it has failed. So we might begin to look in the direction of mobilizing private sector players to also step into the scene. After all, they are investing in some of these countries, and they might be able to really exert or extract some commitment from those leaders. Okay. Because on the analysis, this thing also has economic dimension.
Right. So as we wrap up this show, I'm going to put my final question to the both of you, and I want to start with you, Dr. Ojawale, because some have argued that mediation often happens between men in suits in five-star hotels, as Dr. Ali mentioned, and that there should be more inclusivity, just like he said, to include, for example, the civil society, women's groups, and the youth who actually leave the conflict into the core of the negotiation process. So would this work, and how can we involve them?
Yes, I think it can work. The unfortunate thing is that the Congo crisis is so convoluted and complex that when you look at one side, you see another side left unattended to. And that is the reason why I also believe so strongly that they really need to look inward. I've participated in meetings where we bring Rwandese and Congolese to talk on Twitter, on TweetMeet and some of these meetings. By the time you begin to hear what they are saying, you realize that the crisis in Congo is not only economic, it has very deep historical and sociological angle, which I think the present situations are not really addressing. And I think that is where those infrastructure of peace that you mentioned really can't at this point, because it's looking like a generation is handing over the grievances and the hate to another, and that needs to be terminated now. And to do that, you really need to rely on the foundational building blocks, those peace building infrastructure, the women, the youths, and the religious body, just broadening that scope at that level.
Dr. Ali, what do you think?
Yeah, DR Congo is a very long challenge, and it's been there since Congo got its independence. It is a poly-crisis. It's a very complicated conflict, and therefore the way to address it, the just top-down elitist approach to addressing that conflict is not going to work. It has to be a blend of top-down, yes, with the diplomats and facilitators, mediators, former heads of states, but also communities. A blend of that then is going to bring about a structure and a model that is going to ensure there's long-term resolution of that problem in the DR Congo.
All right. Well, thank you very much for those views. And that's all for this edition of Talk Africa. A very big thank you to my guests, Dr. Oluwole Ojawale, who is the Regional Coordinator for the Central Africa region at the Institute for Security Studies, and in studio with me, Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali. He is the founder and chairman of the Horn Institute for Strategic Studies. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles, and you can also catch this show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Penina Karibe, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, it's goodbye.